Hi everyone, number one Marmaduke fan here. My flight home got canceled. I'm stuck here at the airport. It what? Airport? I am so tired you can tell. But I read some Usagi Yojimbo comics while I was waiting to hear about my flight status. And the theme of this video is that Stan Sakai's Usagi Yojimbo comics are one of those books that you want to have when you're trapped at an airport and they don't have hotels for people, and you're just gonna sleep in your chairs here and wait for your flight early the next morning because you finish one and then you flip back to the front of the book and you start reading it again, and you could talk about multiple things. You could talk about Usagi Yojimbo and the art style. You could talk about Usagi Yojimbo and the pacing. You could talk about the composition. You could talk about the themes of Bushido and the Japanese history of it. You could talk about this as a kid's first comic kind of a book. This three-part series, issue 145 through 147, I think this will be worth its own video to talk about how Sakai uses composition in his story. Because the elephant in the room is that Stan Sakai has a very rough style. It's sometimes even an ugly drawing style. It's not a Disney cartoon animal style. It's not a weeby anime cartoon animal style, but it's the perfect style for his world. And I think because he has a rough style, it makes his books an excellent example to look at how he's using composition and panel layout to make the reading of the comic an experience. And I found several good examples in this three-part series. A lot of his issues are even just one-parters, so this is so easy to just hop into it. I'd seen Usagi interact with some of these characters, but he does such a good job of just conveying the basics of the idea that I didn't remember. I don't know if I've read the story with this thief girl before, but I got right into that story. But just for tonight, I think I'm going to focus on Usagi Yojimbo Color Special, this reprinted old stories published in Dark Horse Presents issues. I really love this drawing, and I hope Stan Sakai considers doing a whole Usagi Yojimbo story in this looser, sketchier style. I think it brings out a lot of emotion in the character. And this was around the time of the Sakai Project, which was a book done to benefit the Sakai family as Sharon Sakai was fighting cancer. And all sorts of artists contributed to it. There's Mike Mignola of Hellboy fame right there. If you are not following the Usagi Yojimbo series, get on this series, gang. My introduction to this character, like a lot of kids, I saw him in the Ninja Turtles cartoon and said, oh, this is interesting. I wonder what this character is. And then when I started reading volume 1, 2, and 3, which collected the old issues, sorry, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fans, but I think that Stan Sakai's Usagi Yojimbo world may be the superior comic to the Ninja Turtles craze, which is still going on because of just the depth of this world and of this story content. I'm not saying I hate Ninja Turtles. They kind of cross promote each other and they fit together really nicely. But what I think I'm getting at is what clicked with me about Usagi Yojimbo is how much Stan Sakai appreciates Japanese film. And for me, I guess I watched the Pokemon anime and a Bible anime when I was a little kid, but I hated Dragon Ball Z. I hated Yu-Gi-Oh! I thought a lot of the popular anime looked kind of stupid. So really Japanese film was kind of my introduction to Japanese culture and then eventually to anime. And Stan Sakai is pulling common tropes and ideas from some of the best samurai films ever made. I mean, even the name Usagi Yojimbo, it's a nod to Yojimbo starring Toshiro Mifune. If you watch samurai movies at all, there's a good chance that Stan Sakai is pulled from something you've watched, and he's facilitated that into the world of this character. And Samurai Jack changed my life. I just think of Samurai Jack staring into the Scotsman's eyes and saying, I fear no man. I think of Samurai Jack's righteousness. And that informed me growing up as a kid. And then I come to Usagi Yojimbo as an adult for the first time, and I see the line of succession from Usagi Yojimbo to Samurai Jack of this moral character whose defining trait really is his code of Bushido, but really his goodness. He's a rough man who is a good man rabbit, functionally a man in the context of the story. So, looking at this color edition, colors by Tom Luth, I'll point that out because I think Luth does a good job in not having me notice his work too much. It just fits with the feel of the world. It's very simple, doesn't fight or compete with this with Sakai's simple line illustration, with the very lightest indication of shading. And Saya Scabbards is my favorite story in this collection. The artist is good as well and really makes use of the color, since Usagi Yojimbo is normally kind of like a black and white on newsprint kind of vibe. By the way, Dark Horse, $3.50 for a black and white comic on newsprint and $3.99 for a color comic on fancy paper. If you're going to print black and white on newsprint, I don't know, get me down to that $2 range. Make it easier for me to collect. I'm mad at myself for smushing this comic, but I'm going to take really good care of this one. So let me flip forward to the artist, since I'm not going to talk about that too much. That's the comic that's the story that this one is based off of. So, Usagi Yojimbo meets this artist who has learned from Western art styles, and so he draws differently than traditional Japanese artists. And look at that, Conte crayon. That's the correct medium for what the character is using. It shows that Sakai has multiple artistic chops. He chooses to use this sort of rough, sketchy line style for the comic world, I think, because it helps promote readability. But the man can paint. This is an artist who works and works and works. 200 plus issues of stories featuring this character. Stan Sakai tells a kick-butt samurai story in the tradition of great Japanese film, and he tells a bunch of them. And he draws everything. And I bet he letters everything, too. So Saya is the story I really want to talk about. So great opening. Musical opening with a theme that connects to the theme of the story. So the rice gatherers are singing about, "Oh, samurai, keep your sword in your sheath." The sword that's drawn too often, it rusts and it is destroyed. The best sword is the one that is kept sheathed. Makes sense for a peasant to sing that, because they would usually get caught up in all these wars and end up dead. And Usagi Yojimbo, he's walking along and the children bump into him and he jostles a proper samurai's sword. So Usagi Yojimbo is a ronin. His real name is Miyamoto Usagi, named after Miyamoto Musashi, the famous historical samurai, the star of the Samurai Trilogy film starring Toshiro Mifune. It's everywhere. Sakai's world is soaked in this inspiration. And so because he's offended this samurai, he's challenged. And I love this interaction. He demands an apology. Silence, you can't brush off your lack of courtesy by blaming others. And then Usagi bows and apologizes again and recognizes that he acknowledges that he was flippant. And then the proper samurai demands that Usagi grovel on the ground like a worm. And his response is clear that no apology I offer will satisfy you. Goodbye. Boom. Okay, this scene, this little interaction, this is everything I think defines good, heroic masculinity. Look, and it shows up in this comic too. Usagi does not like taking life, but he defends himself. He apologizes. He bows. He humbles himself, but he's not an idiot. He knows when he runs into a toxic person, a nasty person who wants to be offended, he senses that, and because he's not naive, then he moves on. So, of course, this offends the samurai who challenges him to a fight, and Usagi takes them into the woods to have their fight away from the villagers. And the proper samurai, the samurai who has a lord, remarks that Usagi's blade is rusted and nicked and looks like it might fall apart, and his is well polished and well honed, right? And alluding back to the song at the beginning, talking about how the best sword is the one that is not drawn. They have their fight, and Usagi does this great feat, like when I think of Zatoichi, cutting a candle in half, and then he cuts the wick and flame in half too. He does something awesome in the story. He catches the samurai's sword in his scabbard, and which is a heroic feat. It's a fantastical feat that you probably couldn't do in real life, but it's done off screen, and it's done in a way that feels connected with the samurai movies that inspired this genre of storytelling. And then the samurai offers to give Usagi his fine, expensive sword in exchange for his life. Yours is a fine blade, but the sword reflects the soul of the samurai. It is the samurai's soul. You cheapen your soul. Abayo, which means goodbye. Boom. So what I love, and then he goes back, walks past the villagers, and they're still singing the song about the reflection, how the best sword is the sword that is not drawn. So what I love about this is this works on multiple levels. Usagi's sword is rusted and nicked from having drawn his sword too much. It's like his soul is damaged. Yet, in this interaction with this arrogant samurai, what's clear is that Usagi is the bigger man. He is the better man. In his behavior, he acts with virtue, and so kind of the tragedy of this is that Usagi defines his life by the Japanese code of Bushido, but he looks at his sword as his soul. The samurai's soul is his sword in Usagi's thinking. You would think that would mean that the nicked and damaged sword is the sword of the immoral and unvirtuous character, and the fine and purified sword is the sword of the virtuous and noble character, but it's reversed. This works on multiple levels. It's poetry. It's poetry in the form of comics, and I don't know. I feel simultaneously admiration and sadness for this character in this little. How many pages is this? Let's count this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. A cool action story, beginning, middle, and themes of great historic feel and vibe to it, and themes that matter. Dang it, I am just so sick of Marvel and DC comics. I'm so sick of comics that waste time and lecture me about voting Trump. Am I right? Trump, am I right? Stories are, punch some Nazi stories. Those are not going to matter in 2 years. This story is going to work in 100 years. Fantastic. That's the vid. Usagi Yojimbo. These are the comics you want to read with your kids. I think there were even some letters columns to that effect. I spoiled some things from recent Usagi comics by reading the letters columns. But look, dad with like his 6-year-old son who, you read this with your kid. They're going to learn things. Yeah, it is fantasy, but you will learn things about history and culture by reading this. You're going to learn things about life from this character. Really, this is kind of a illustration of the great appeal of, I think, the best stories. Individualism, being upright, being concerned for human life, not letting people take advantage of you. Wunderbar. All right. I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. Time for me to catch some sleep on this comfy bed. See you later.